What we're going to do is we're going to talk through caring for caregivers. That's the topic for today, and I'm going to talk to you about what we know from the positive psychology research and also what I know based on my own personal experience. And hopefully this will be useful to any of you who are going through this process of caring for somebody who has a chronic health issue. So as I said, if you have questions, technical issues, what have you, go ahead and put them in the chat box and Mary Beth will help communicate that to us as need be. So I'm going to go ahead and pop open my slides and share my screen. I guess I will share my screen first and put these slides up. So many options here. Okay. And let's see if I can share my screen because it's so much more fun when you have pictures and things to think about while you're looking at the slides. Okay. So hopefully you guys can see my screen. There's a slide on the left that says Caring for Caregivers, which is our topic for today. My name is Lara Kallander. I have a PhD in chemistry, a master's in applied positive psychology, and CPC is a certified professional coach. And today is April 20, 2020, which I'm hearing is some exciting day because there's 420s in 2020. But anyway, what we're talking about today is positive psychology and how we bring that whole experience of both the positive and negative in life together to sort of really live our lives. So part of positive psychology is recognizing that relationships are one of the key elements that drive what we do and what's important to us. But one of the challenges, of course, with relationships come challenges that sometimes happen in relationships. So today we're really focusing on people that we love. So it could be our parents, it could be our spouse, it could be our children, but people that we really care about that are dealing with health, very serious types of chronic health issues. So I know that some people are thinking of today a lot about nurses and doctors and EMTs because they are actually caregivers as well, and they're critical to what we're going through with this COVID epidemic. But one thing that we're talking about today is really focusing on that caregiver that's sort of in a 24/7 role as a caregiver, because that's one that lasts, it can last for months or years, and it can really take its toll. So as much as I support, obviously, the nurses and doctors that are helping the sick folks today, there's also the folks at home that play a huge role in helping make sure everybody's healthy. So what I just wanted to say about this slide is it looks like it's a mother taking care of her son. This can happen with children. It can happen, as I said, with parents. It can happen in a number of different situations. And I know that, as I said in the introduction, the patient is really the primary person that we all need to address and support. But those caregivers play an important role, not only in helping that patient or that sick person be successful, but also in their own health and their own well-being is very important. So I'm going to introduce myself a little bit on the next slide, just so you know where I'm coming from and why I'm interested in this topic. So I was born and raised in California. I did my education in California all the way up through a PhD, which I got at Stanford. And then I went to work in pharmaceutical research. And perhaps that looks like a very linear, straightforward path to sort of study chemistry and go work in pharma. It seemed to me at the time that was the case. But there's really a nugget of inspiration in that story that's not on that top line. And that's that when I was a teenager, my mom had some chronic health issues and she was bedridden for more than a year. And that was really hard on me as a teenager to see my mom suffer. Well, luckily for all of us, she was able to take medicine and get better. And she actually rebuilt her life, built a whole new career, and moved on in so many wonderful and beautiful ways. So that's what actually inspired me to go and work in pharmaceuticals, because I thought, wow, if these medicines can really turn somebody's life around, that's amazing. And I want to be part of that. And I really care about well-being and people having opportunities. So that was a really good fit for me for a long time. Well, of course, as with any path in life, there's some detours. And while I was working in pharmaceuticals, I had the joyous detour, first of all, of having a beautiful family. So I have a husband and 2 teenage daughters, and that's been really an inspiration and a joy for me all these years. So working and raising a family, feeling like I'm juggling everything. Then things hit a tougher time where I had a serious health diagnosis, which was life-threatening. And then soon after my recovery from that, my daughter had a very serious health issue as well. So different illnesses that my mom and myself and my daughter have all had, they're unrelated, but all of us have had that day where you go to the doctor and you think, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. This is going to be terrible. So what I've learned is there's a lot of resilience and positive things that can come out of that experience. And that's what I want to help you do if you're living in that day-to-day moment where you're taking care of somebody you care about and worried about what's next. So when I was taking care of my daughter, I learned about something called post-traumatic growth, which is really just a phenomenal way to think about how, after you recover, what you can do and how you can build meaning into your life. So that idea of post-traumatic growth was really eye-opening for me. And that's what led me eventually to get a master's degree in positive psychology. So I went to Penn, and that was just a few years ago. I got that master's degree. Now I also teach at Penn, and I have my own coaching business called Thriving Through Adversity Coaching. And what I'm doing is I'm helping people individually who want to thrive through adversities like health issues, and help them live full and meaningful lives and pay attention to their well-being along the way. So I love that what I get to do now is help people real time. I really enjoyed doing scientific research, but I love what I'm doing now even more in some ways because I really get to help people on a day-to-day basis, and you see the impact of what you're doing in a very short time frame. So that's where I come from, and I just wanted to add that context before we move on to what we know about positive psychology and how that can impact you as a caregiver. Jump in real quick and say, Mary Beth, getting any technical issues along the way or problems?
Nope, everything's good.
Perfect. All right. So as caregivers, it's really important to recognize that we have needs. Okay, everybody has needs, and as I said, the focus on the patient is really important, and I wouldn't take anything away from them. But at the same time, we need to recognize that caregivers have an important role in helping that person become healthy. So there's 3 areas we're going to focus on. One is called positive affect. The second one's called self-efficacy, and the third is called hope. Now, some of these terms may seem familiar to you, some of them not so much. I'm going to go ahead and define all the terms, so don't worry about that. But they really are all topic areas that rest on positive psychology and have data to back them up as far as understanding how they help you as a caregiver to focus on your own well-being and then to help somebody else with theirs. The other example I like to talk about is that oxygen mask that they talk about on airplanes. So when you're on an airplane, they say, if there's a lowering of oxygen pressure in the cabin, masks will fall down, and you're supposed to put on your own mask first and then help somebody who's with you. And the obvious reason for that is because your child can't put an oxygen mask on you, right? So you have to put on your own mask. And that's why I think it's really important for us to remember that taking care of the caregiver is a key part of that equation. Because if the caregiver can't robustly move through this process of what it is that you're doing, that's going to be a problem for everybody. So, all right. So let's start with positive affect, just around defining it. I mean, I totally love this watercolor picture that I got from an online source, but like the sun's out and the flowers are out and the kid's got his arms in the air. I think kids are amazing at being able to show joy and positive affect in a really exciting way. So positive is really just the preferred. It's not that negative is bad and positive is good. It's really just that positive is what's preferred. And then affect is an action. It's like how you show up. So affect is like what you're doing and how that shows up in a positive way. So how do you show up, right? How do you show up when you're going new places, when you're taking your loved one to the doctor, when you're dealing with how they're having a serious health issue? And one of the things is that we know that being open and friendly are examples of positive affect, right? Now, I'm not telling you to be joyful when you're not joyful. I'm not one to recommend that you should pretend anything. But there is something about being open and being friendly that can be useful to you when you're having a conversation about your loved one's health. Because being open to what your options are, being open to how you want to approach something is an important way to help get the best out of that situation. Okay, so what we know about positive affect. Well, a couple of years ago, these people did an amazing study, just 2017, where they took positive affect skills that we have studied in school and that we know how to help people work through. And what we know is that for patients that were diagnosed with HIV, if they went through this positive affect skill intervention, then they had reduced antidepressant use and they had reduced intrusive and avoidant thoughts, right? So imagine that you've been given a serious health diagnosis like HIV or cancer or something along those lines, and you have that moment where you're thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to deal with this? And there's like the week after and the month after, and you're trying to adjust to this new normal. It can be really challenging, and obviously people, depend on things like antidepressants, and they have a lot of intrusive and avoidant thoughts, sort of negative scenarios play out in their head. Well, it turns out that they can prove that by doing this positive affect skills intervention, you can reduce the need for those. And so the way that the intervention works is it's an 8-week program, and they go through these 6 topics, and they build on them with each other as a group. And as with most things in positive psychology, some of the interventions work better for some people and some for others, but they all play a role. So what we'll talk about in more detail on the next slide is both gratitude and strengths. So these are like character strengths and your appreciation. I think a couple that we're not going to get to but are really important is mindfulness, for instance. So sometimes as a sick person, I've been the patient myself, or as a family member, you might be playing out into the future and saying, oh, this means these negative things are going to happen, or what have you. You play out those negative scenarios in your head. And mindfulness can really help you bring back to the present and say, this is our present situation. We don't know what's going to happen, but here's our present situation. And it can help you get a little space from those thoughts that sort of run around in your head. Achievable goals, you're going to see tie into the self-efficacy. Positive reappraisals, taking information and figuring out how to see it in the most positive light. And then acts of kindness is around helping other people, because it turns out that even if you're in a state that's not ideal for yourself, if you offer to help somebody else, it can boost your own well-being. So for instance, if you have neighbors right now who are having trouble getting to the grocery store and you offer to go for them, they're going to feel good, you're going to feel good. It's going to be a win-win all the way around. So in my opinion, if these all things are good for the patient, I think they're also good for the caregiver. Okay, so positive affect affects everybody. It's what you bring and how you show up. It's also how, as a patient, you show up. So what I'm going to talk to you about is, for positive affect, a move to action. If this is something that interests you and something that you would like to do, I have just some advice here about how you would go about that. So the first one is around gratitude. So this would be to take time each day to think of 3 blessings that you have, and they can be small or large. Don't think that they have to be, like super amazing. They can be small. Cup of coffee, got a chance to read the newspaper, or maybe these days you get a chance to read some positive news, or watch a comedy show or something like that. So I gave you an example here for myself. So my knee pain is getting better because I'm taking care of myself. Now, part of the gratitude exercise is to capture also what the causes are for the blessings, because oftentimes we have a role in that positive thing that's happening, and that's important for us to recognize. So for me, I am taking care of myself and my knee pain is getting better, and I'm very happy about that. I feel like that's something genuinely to be grateful for. So what they do when they recommend this as a practice is write down 3 blessings either in the evening or the morning each day, and do it for a week. And even 6 months out, they see positive effects for this, and it's probably because people make it a habit and they start doing it on a routine basis. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is character strengths. So there's an assessment online that you can take, and your loved one can also do this if they are able. There is a children's version if the patient that you're the ill person that you're dealing with is a child. And then you can practice your character strengths in a new way, and you can also appreciate the strengths that your loved one has and point them out. It's really a profound bonding experience to have strengths and know yours, and have somebody else know their strengths, and to sort of share with them and understand and appreciate each other in that way. So that's a really phenomenal experience that I would recommend. So each exercise, the gratitude and the character strengths, has been shown to improve happiness and reduce depression over a 6-month period. And this is the publication, should you want to look at it. All right, quick question for Mary Beth. Any technical or any burning questions from our panelists?
Not yet, no.
Wonderful. All right, I'll leave time for questions at the end probably, because I don't think anybody's going to jump in here too much, because we're a good third into the session. Okay. So self-efficacy. What is self-efficacy, right? So these are terms that we use and hear and think about, but maybe it's not something we use in our everyday language. Well, Bandura is a professor who's been studying self-efficacy for at least 30 years. And what he has come to understand is that self-efficacy is about your beliefs, about your capabilities to perform tasks. And it's really that belief that is a critical component about self-efficacy. because of course, if you think you can do something, you're much more likely to be able to do it. Okay. And how do you generate these beliefs, or where do these beliefs come from? We're going to dig into that a little bit. And then there's confidence. What is your confidence that you can get through the day and handle what comes your way? I mean, I love this picture of this woman. She's juggling clocks, 8 a.m., 10 a.m., 12, 2, 4, because sometimes when you're caring for a sick person, 2 hours can seem like a huge amount of time. Like time really slows down. And I think it's because of the worry and concern and what have you. But sometimes just getting through the day is what you have. That's your accomplishment and what you can be proud of. So it can seem like a lot of time. But at the same time, having confidence that you can get through that day could really go a long way, right? So she's smiling. I think she's got this. So what do we know about self-efficacy? So it really impacts how we approach a situation, and that's why it's so important. It's not just whether we have confidence we can approach something or solve something or address something. It's really, are we going to follow through? So it affects our level of effort and perseverance, right? So there's an outcome associated with self-efficacy in that there's an effect in how you show up. And this reminds me, of course, of that children's book, The Little Engine That Could. She thinks she can't get the toys over the mountain, but she gets that confidence from somewhere inside her. She's like, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. So it sort of begs that question of, how do you get to a place where you think you can? So many of us are thrust into an unexpected situation. How do you build that self-efficacy to be able to then also have an influence on the outcome, right? Because it's that outcome that we really want to see. Well, I'll tell you a little bit more about what we know about self-efficacy from Bandura and others. And the order that they present these steps in self-efficacy kind of match what my experience is as a caretaker in the way that I would encourage people to invest themselves, okay? So the first one is really experience of mastery, and that's repeated accomplishment. You've tried something, you've accomplished, it's the next day, it's the same thing or a related thing. You've been able to do it in the past, so you have reason to think that you can do it in the future. And if you're a caregiver for somebody who's dealing with a serious health issue, I strongly encourage you to start what I call a proud of list, a place where you write down the things that you did, because otherwise you forget, right? You go through challenging times and you go, oh, well, of course that happened because whatever. Instead of saying, I made this effort, this was the outcome, and it does help you remember that experience of mastery. And then that makes it easier for you to repeat that accomplishment should you need to in the future. The second one is modeling. So modeling is really about seeing other people succeed in a similar situation. And it's usually they have a similar lifestyle to yours, they have a similar experience, maybe a similar illness that the family's facing. So what I think is really useful here is to join a support group. So almost every illness has a support group associated with it through your hospital or through other places. And that's a really key and important way for you to see other people succeed in what they're dealing with. So I mentioned that you might have an accomplishment that you've done on a certain day, and they have an accomplishment they've done on a different day, and you share your stories with each other, and then you help each other figure out how you're going to succeed and build forward. So modeling is a really important way as a way to boost your self-efficacy as a caregiver. Then there's social persuasion, which is encouragement from others. And what I really mean about this is take in that positive feedback. There will be people along the way who say, oh my gosh, you're doing an amazing job. And just like say, okay, thank you for saying so. I needed to hear that, right? So take in any positive feedback you get from friends or family, or even from, the medical community. If they're encouraging you, they're saying, we really need you to do this, and we know it's hard, but we think you can do it. Just take it in and try to accept that kindness from them. I think that's really important. The fourth thing about self-efficacy I'm going to talk about is psychological factors. So psychological factors include things like if your heart is racing and you have shallow breathing, are you excited or are you nervous, right? So psychological factor is determining what's going on for you based on what's going on in your body and assessing that. But the other thing I think that's important, it's a psychological factor, is your explanatory style. So here I'm going to talk a little bit about the optimistic explanatory style, excuse me. And it's really about whether if something bad happens to somebody in your family, they come down with some kind of an illness or have a health issue, Are you assuming that it's like their fault? Well, no, of course not. Are you assuming that it's permanent? Well, no. Illnesses move through us. Are you assuming that it's pervasive, that it's, going to affect everything in your life? Well, no. You're really assuming that there's some kind of an external cause, that it's temporary, and that it's a specific situation. And that leads you to an optimistic explanatory style, which makes it easier to get through that day to day. Okay? All right, so I'm going to keep going. I saw something pop up. I don't know if that was from the chat box, but Mary Beth will jump in and interrupt me if there's a problem.
No, we're good so far.
Perfect. I'm sure. Okay. So our third topic was hope. This is the one I love the most because here's, a picture of somebody just with their arms up in the air. I guess I like arms in the air. Looking at the sun and seeing hope, even though, the rain probably just passed through. And I like this quote from Desmond Tutu, that hope is being able to see that there is light despite all of the darkness. And sometimes in life, there's quite a bit of darkness. And I think with this COVID epidemic, for sure, there's quite a bit of darkness. So hope is about desire for certain things to happen, right? So you want things to be a certain way. And it's a passion for what's possible. You can see what's possible. And once you can see what's possible, you're more likely to be able to get there. So you let go of your worries. And you get attached to what it is, that vision, that long-term vision that you're seeing. And you try to turn that into what you can as far as building the best future for yourself and for your family. Okay? So hope has two components. I'm going to talk about hope part one, which is around post-traumatic growth. And I hinted about this at the beginning when I talked about, I discovered and learned about post-traumatic growth when my daughter was not well, and that's what led me to the master's degree in positive psychology. And Tedeschi is an author who's really well known in this area. But post-traumatic growth is sort of the ability to have a positive change after a challenging or traumatic event. Okay, so when I first heard about this, I thought, well, I know about post-traumatic stress disorder. Like, I thought only bad things happened after trauma. That was my perception of what the world was like. And I thought there could be something good. What the heck is this? I have to learn all about it, right? It made me really curious. So it's sort of similar to a silver lining experience where individuals can reflect on a good after a bad experience. So post-traumatic growth offers the opportunity to grow stronger or wiser after a trauma in a way that ultimately improves your life. So post-traumatic growth is not something that happens right away. It's not like the trauma happens and you go to growth right away. You have to move your way through the trauma and recover and rebuild before you're ready for post-traumatic growth. So I don't want anyone to think they're going to go off and do this tomorrow, but what I want to do is plant the seed that it exists, because if you're going through trauma or you've been through trauma in some way with a loved one, I want you to know that there is something called post-traumatic growth that can help you move in a direction when the time is appropriate. So that's, I don't want to oversell it and say this is the magic bullet for today, but this is something for you to be aware of when the time's appropriate for you and what you're going through. Okay. The other piece about hope is a little bit darker, and I just wanted to be honest with you in the sense that we know that sometimes the life of someone you love can't be saved. So I lost my dad to a chronic illness more than 20 years ago, and that was very sad and painful for all of us. And we know that that happens. And so I don't want to sugarcoat things and pretend it's always a good story. So what do you do in that situation? Well, re-goaling is the first thing I would encourage you to think about. So Dr. Footner at CHOP, he coaches doctors who deliver bad news to parents, right? CHOP is Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania. And he has to teach doctors how to share bad news with the parents of patients of theirs. And he also does research in this area. And what he's found is that parents who can re-goal in situations where life-saving is not an option, they often consider quality of life care for their children to be much more important. And they really focus on that quality of life piece. And I think that's important to understand as far as when you're dealing with a situation where a life cannot be saved, is that quality of life for the time that you have left. The other piece I wanted to share with you around this topic is that they've decided there's a 6th stage of grief. So the common 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But David Kessler, who worked with Kubler-Ross on that research, has just written a book. It's called Finding Meaning, the 6th Stage of Grief. And it's really interesting to sort of think about how this, in some ways, this is like post-traumatic growth. It doesn't happen right away. But after you've moved through these steps, there is a sixth step where you can create meaning from that experience. I mean, when you think about memorials that we've built, right, for fallen soldiers or things like that, there's ways that we build meaning after trauma. Think about, I think there's a museum now where the 9/11 towers fell, right? So people got to that stage past acceptance where they said, let's turn this into meaning and make it something meaningful for people. So I wanted to share that as well. I just wanted to be honest about the fact that there's life, and that it's very challenging, but quality of life and meaning is very important, as well as getting support from each other. So I would definitely encourage you, if you're in this stage, to reach out and get support from additional people. So moving on, just to wrap it up. So as a caregiver, your well-being matters. That's the point that I want to make. I think sometimes we overlook this piece because we're so focused on the patient, and the patient's well-being obviously matters. As I said, that's step number one. But there's a critical role here for caregivers, and without them being able to address their own well-being, they're not going to be able to show up as the caregivers they want to be. They won't have the positive affect, they won't have the self-efficacy, and they won't have the hope to get through those dark times. Unfortunately, there are some dark times when dealing with health issues for family members. So what I think, it's really important to take some time to invest in your well-being, and it will benefit both you and the person you're taking care of. We discussed some practical tips that you can take into action. So I talked about, for positive affect, I talked about gratitude and strengths. For self-efficacy, I talked about, modeling, joining support groups, keeping track of your accomplishments, so you're paying attention to that. And also, I think for hope, being aware of what your options are, knowing how you can approach something, what post-traumatic growth might look like, how you can recover from a loss if that's what happens. So I wanted to say just that if you're a caregiver, I see you, and I know that it's really, really tough. And I hopefully can provide some guidance and support for you in the process that you're going through. I have my email address up here, TTA Coaching, for the business that I run, or you can just look me up on LinkedIn. My name's Lara Kallander. I'm pretty sure I'm the only Lara Kallander out there. So if you can spell it, you can find me. And I'd be happy to entertain any questions if there's questions. If you have questions, pop them in the chat box, and I'm sure Mary Beth can translate or what have you.
Okay, we have one question.
Okay.
How do you maintain a positive focus when the ongoing situation appears to have no end date?
Yeah, well, that's true for COVID and probably any kind of a health issue. So how do you keep a positive focus when there is no end date? I think gratitude is really a key piece right there, because none of us can control the future, and the only time that we have for sure is right now, right? So let's start from now. Let's focus on the here and now. And gratitude is about recognizing what you still have in the moment and not getting ahead of yourself and focusing on what's coming in the future. So I think gratitude and mindfulness in some way play a role in helping you stay centered in the moment and not let your head spin into the what if this, what if this, what if this. I mean, clearly things happen and people struggle, and you don't know when you're going to know. And I think that's the best thing you can do, is try to be here in the present moment and make today the best day it can be. I'm not saying it's going to be a great day, because maybe it's a really challenging day, but is there some element or piece that you can add to that day to make it the best day it can be? I know for myself, when I was a patient, I used to listen to this song called The Best Day of Your Life. And I would try to think, okay, well, how can I make this day the best it can be? And I think that's sort of the reality of what you're dealing with. Thank you, everybody. I'm glad you're able to join.